Greetings, 99 percenters. This is your host, Dr. Jack Rasmuss. This is Alternative Visions. Okay, by far the most important event of the past week was the BRICS conference in Kazan, Russia. Why? Well, this will be noted as a historic milestone in the decline of the U.S. global economic empire. No doubt. It's that important an event that has occurred this week. It just finished. I think it started on the 23rd and finished yesterday. 36 countries met in Kazan, and the purpose was to begin developing what they call an alternative global economic infrastructure. Alternative to what? To the U.S. global empire. Yes, the U.S. has a global empire, economic empire, which it keeps enforcing through political means, through the institutions it has created, and increasingly in the 21st century, as U.S. position is weakened, by force, military force, and sanctions, which go along with the military action. I mean, the U.S. has been at war pretty much constantly here in the last quarter century. Why? Well, the reason is they're reacting, the U.S. elite, are reacting to the pressures in which the rest of the world doesn't want to go along with the rules. You know, they call it the rules-based order, right? Well, it's their rules, you know, and there's an old saying, whoever has the gold makes the rules, the golden rule, right? Okay. So, you know, that's the origins of this. Actually, you know, the BRICS, what's the BRICS for those who may not know? BRICS is an acronym, B-R-I-C-S. And that's for the first 5 members who came together and created the BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They came together in 2009. Oh, wow. That's an interesting date, isn't it? Yeah, that was in the depth of the global economic crisis that erupted, the financial crash and the real economy that dragged down as a result across the world. Well, you know, that was a response to the important event of that crash, because that crash is also a kind of an economic milestone here in the 21st century. The U.S. economy still hasn't fully recovered from that. That's a whole topic to talk about sometime. But, you know, why did these countries come together? Well, they came together to protect their interests. You know, well, is the West going to crash here? You know, we better get together and figure out on what we're going to do. And that was really the source of the origin, the response to the 2008-9 great crash, financial crash and recession. That's when the first 5 BRICS took form. And another milestone was reached here in the wake of the Ukraine war, which erupted February 2022. Right? And, well, those are the response to the war, not directly, but 5 more countries were added to the BRICS. These were Saudi Arabia, UAE, Arab republics, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia. And Argentina was going to join, but they had that big change in the government down there, and you got that crazy libertarian running the show on behalf of the Western banks. Milei, I think his name is. Okay, so the Argentina opted out at the last minute. So you had Middle East countries. These are all oil-producing countries. That's significant. This is the second group that joined the BRICS here just a couple of years ago. Well, why did they join? Sanctions. Not the Ukraine war per se, but U.S. sanctions that the U.S. imposed as part of the whole process of the economic and military war against Russia. And that's what NATO did, and of course the U.S. is NATO. All the rest are junior partners. And that includes France and Germany and the UK now. Europe is just a dependency of the United States when it comes to foreign policy and now the economy. That's another topic. We'll get into that eventually at some future show, how the U.S. is crushing Europe economically and making it more dependent upon the USA. But the sanctions, kind of gave a message to the rest of the world. Hey, look, if you don't do the bidding of the U.S., which is taking his gloves off now and is using force to maintain the empire, if you don't do what the U.S. wants, well, then the U.S. will sanction you too. And sanctions are an economic weapon, you see. It they're designed to undermine the economy of the target country, right, and have them come to heel here to the U.S. Demands and interests. That's what sanctions are about. Well, the sanctions didn't work so well against Russia, as we know. Russia's economy has in some ways strengthened because of the sanctions. It's increased investment, particularly in the military side, which has boosted the economy, raised the standard of living in some ways. So it didn't work, but it gave a message to the rest of the world because the U.S. sanctions apply to the rest of the world's economy in a sense, indirectly. You can primary sanction Russia, and the sanctions, of course, focused on Russian oil exports and revenue from oil exports, which was supposed to end up undermining Russia's economy. They would be deprived as a result of sanctions of oil revenue, and they therefore could not finance the growth of their military. And the whole idea was, the economy would crash, and that would lead to the oligarchs overthrowing Putin. That was the whole CIA neocon argument back in 2021, and that's why the U.S. Implemented those sanctions and went after the war, instigated the war there between Ukraine and Russia. But the sanctions are an important weapon in that war. But the sanctions can bite in multiple directions, The sanctions did not work so well against Russia. They had more of a negative effect on Europe as the U.S. drove Russia out of the Western European economies. And by the way, entered the vacuum, U.S. companies charging Europeans even more. That's part of the dependency, you see. The sanctions and war in Ukraine may not have debilitated Russia's economy, but it sure did the European economy, making it more dependent on the U.S. I always thought that was an objective of the war in the U.S. sense here. If they prevailed, they would really break up Russia. But if they didn't, at least they would make Europe more dependent. But the sanctions bite in more directions, even in Russia and in Europe, because they threaten all these other countries, particularly the oil-producing countries. The sanctions say, if you sell oil or buy oil from Russia or participate, in any way with Russia in terms of its natural resources sales and oil sales, then you will be sanctioned too. See, that was the whole idea. Secondary sanctions, we call them. Well, Russia got around that. They just used different ships, developed their own oil tanker business here, or contracted third parties, or sold their oil and other natural resources to third countries, which then resold them back to Europe at a higher price. Typically a good example is Turkey. Russia just sold this oil to Turkey. Turkey just marked it up and sold it back to the Europeans, right? And the UAE and natural gas and everything. I mean, this is the way it works. But it's a threat. The sanctions are a threat and a warning sign, a shot across the bow to the global South, saying that, the U.S. will sanction you too, or you will be caught up in the web of sanctions. Well, I believe the sanctions warning had a big role to play in the global South now, saying, well, we better be careful about the U.S. here and join our own interests together and think about another path. Because if we in any way indicate we don't want to go along with the U.S. global empire, we want to be more independent, well, then the U.S. is going to sanction us too, So the second tier of BRICS membership that occurred here soon after the start of the Ukraine war is really a response to the sanctions, you see. Well, why is it that now the global South is able to, pretty much thumb its nose to the U.S. here? It couldn't do that in the 1980s, 90s, and before, right? The U.S. had a lot of what they call soft power, political power, economic power. And if anyone got out of line, any leaders of these countries, they would either undermine the country economically with the tools of empire, and they'd depose them or regime change or whatever, and then, if that didn't work, they'd resort to political military action to do it. But the U.S. had a lot of that economic and political power behind the scenes in times past. Why? Because the economies of the global South were dependent upon the U.S. and the West, these 7 countries. They were dependent. They were developed enough that they could go their own way. Well, that's changed. You see, that's a dramatic change. in the last several decades. The global south has been industrialized and developed, not just China, because when we talk about the global south, we mean China, where that picture, that development, a larger economy now, when you adjust for price differences, or what they call PPP, purchasing power parity, inflation adjustment, than the U.S. China is, right? And then India is developing rapidly as well. But you've got other countries out there that are also very rapidly developing in the Middle East. All that wealth in Saudi Arabia, generated by Saudi Arabia. You got countries like Indonesia and Turkey and others in Asia. And these countries are quite well economically developed. So they can stand up to the U.S. empire now, right? And they are. And they're getting together and forming a joint resistance to the empire. And that's the big threat, you see. And the countries that have joined, as I said, mostly in the second tier after the war in Ukraine, are mostly in the Middle East. But at the Kazan conference here that was held in Russia this past week, we got 36 countries that have petitioned to join the BRICS. And it'll be interesting to see which ones jump on board immediately and which others sort of take their time. But, there's talk about Turkey joining. Well, that's going to be interesting because it's right in the middle of NATO. And then there's even rumors of some of the more independent European countries also joining the BRICS, countries that are in the EU, European Union. Well, who are they? Well, obviously Hungary is talking about it, but even Austria is talking about it. And maybe Switzerland, of course, Slovakia. That's going to be interesting, one way or another here. And then you got countries all over Latin America, obviously Cuba and Venezuela, even Mexico. This is a critical mass that's being developed here in the form of the BRIC global economic opposition. The BRICS talk about an alternative financial architecture. Now, what does that mean? Alternative financial architecture. Well, that means a series of new institutions that parallel the U.S. global empire, economic institutions we're talking about. And, of course, ultimately would challenge those institutions of the U.S. For global economic hegemony and dominance. The plan is to have even more countries with common GDP greater and trade greater than the West. The core of the American empire, of course, is the G7. We should call it the G8 now, because for all purposes, Australia and New Zealand are part of it. And the core, within the core, what they call the Five Eyes, right? The Anglo-American countries in the economy, the UK, Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand. That's the core of the global empire, the Five Eyes, right? Anglo-American. But then you throw in the other political dependency of the U.S., which is Japan, and the other main European states, which are France, Germany, and Italy, right? And then you've got the West, the G7, G8 core on top of the Five Eyes Anglo core. And then, of course, a series of, think of it like an onion, the U.S. and the Five Eyes and the G7A, are at the center here, and then different relationships and degrees of control and influence for other countries around the world, like South Korea, right? And then in Latin America in general, and some African countries, and then, of course, Asia countries as well. Countries like, Malaysia and Philippines, the relationship there to the empire is a little bit more tenuous. So it's not as if all the empire is in the camp of the G7, G8 on an equal basis. No, it's the onion can be peeled, and that's what the BRICS are doing. They're step by step peeling the onion of the American economic empire here by cutting off some of its outer layers here. Now, that doesn't mean that the BRICS are going to go to war with the empire here. No, they will cleverly try to play both against the middle maintain some relationships with the U.S. empire, but go their own ways in other terms, right? And